Hello and welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. Last week, the nation and the world mourned the death of boxing great Muhammad Ali, a Muslim convert who, because of his faith, denounced violence. This week, we've been traumatized by the terror attack of an alleged lone wolf gunman in Florida who vowed allegiance to the Islamic terror organization ISIS. These are two radically different examples of the same religion. Here to examine why they both exist is Al Fadi, co-author of the book Quran, The Dilemma. Welcome, Al.
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Fine, thanks. You know what? The Muslim community has come out almost as one to condemn the killings in Florida. And when there's anti-gay religious talk, Christianity is usually blamed, the book of Leviticus and all of those scriptures. But what about Islam and homosexuality? What does the Quran say? And could it fuel this kind of attack?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Certainly the Quran, which is the primary source in Islam, which is considered to be the word of Allah, the God of Islam, in multiple locations, at least 7 different locations, mentioned the story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah and condemned the act of those men, basically. And in fact, that's where they get the word sodomy. In Arabic, actually, it's called luwat in reference to Lot. And also chapter 7, chapter 4 are examples of those verses that condemn the behavior. However, the Quran is really not explicit when it comes to punishment. And that's why you have to revert now to the so-called Sharia and the teaching of the Prophet. And even that's debatable. You have teachings by the Prophet of Islam who says that at least transgenders have to be exiled. And when it came to the act of homosexuality between 2 male or 2 female, there is a questionable hadith that says something to the extent that they ought to be killed, both the passive and the active. So we're left now with the man decision, which is Sharia law, and there are, as you know, 4 different schools for the Sunni and at least 1 primary school for the Shia, and really they have varying opinions. You have 7 countries that apply the extreme interpretation of Sharia, including Saudi Arabia, where it is a punishable, basically, offense by the capital punishment execution, if the person is caught, of course, but you have to have witnesses that can provide that. So, and some will say it's just jail time. Others will say the person can repent. Technically speaking, if the act remained a secret, then the person cannot be caught. But if it becomes public, that's the question now.
Very interesting. I want to move on to the next part of that, the violent aspect of it, because, when Muhammad Ali refused the draft, he had to fight in the Vietnam War because of his faith, we were introduced to a peaceful Islam. Is this more accurate view of Islam?
I'm thankful that the majority of the 1.5 or 1.6 billion Muslims, and I really mean the majority, 90% or more, definitely condemn the acts of violence. And the problem is we're left with the 5 to 10% similar to ISIS and Al-Qaeda who take the violent commands in the Quran as being active today, not historical in their context. And that's why the majority of Muslims like Muhammad Ali and others will say, well, those are just taken out of their context, they're historical and so on and so forth. Yet you find people like ISIS say those are commands that are open-ended, apply even today, and it's even against Muslims, not just Christians and Jews. As you know, ISIS is even attacking Muslims who do not adhere to their own interpretation and ideology. And this is the problem really within the Islamic community. And in fact, the King of Jordan was cited saying that this is a civil war between Muslim communities, and they really need to come to the table and determine today if the earlier interpretations of Islam throughout the last 14 centuries are accurate in terms of those violent commands being open-ended, or if those are taken out of context and therefore Islam is truly a religion of peace and does not condone violence. And this is why you have these varying views.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who you know, who is a moderate Muslim, and he spoke on Fox News, and he said that the problem is Islam as a theocracy, making the religion a political ideology, and one that has twisted the Prophet Muhammad's preaching. Do you agree with that, or what are you saying?
Well, and I have all kind of respect to Dr. Jasser, and I really admire his movement, and I hope that he and his movement will get more and more, at least, a prominent platform to allow voices like his. He himself is in danger simply because he is going against the tide. With that said, I can tell you that his view is not going to be supported by historical, basically, interpretation by prominent Islamic scholars and Sharia law scholars. This is why Dr. Jasser and his movement is always going to be faced with the dilemma of trying to explain that reformation of Islam is possible, reinterpretation of these passages is possible. It could happen, but it will require a cooperation from even the Islamic leaders that can affirm those kind of new interpretations like Dr. Jasser's and others.
You know, what is the solution? Because I think everybody's looking for that solution right now. Can moderate Muslims like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, like, the King of Jordan, gain enough control to push back against violent Islamic ideology?
They could, but you need the authorities, like in government authorities, I should say, like in countries that they teach those kind of basically violent passages and historical passages and the history of Islam about invasions and jihad and so on and so forth. If those curriculums will be modified, then movements like Dr. Jasser could succeed without a doubt. But without that cooperation from the ultimate authorities that have the say-so over what can be taught and not taught, I'm afraid that the movement like Dr. Jasser's and others like him will not gain ground and will not be that successful.
I mean, and the problem, of course, are these sort of lone wolf activists like this Omar Mateen. I mean, this is really the issue, is even if you create a movement, will it still gather in people who will act on their own?
Well, Lauren, there is something interesting here. We keep using the word lone wolf and we keep avoiding the word radical Islam. I think someone really ought to do a research and a PhD study on why all the lone wolves share one common denominator, and that's Islam. They're all Islamic. Therefore, there has to be a source that unify all of these lone wolves everywhere, in Europe, in the Middle East, in the U.S., and immediately they transform and do exactly the same act. So this is why I'm saying we have to go back to the original sources that date back 14 centuries ago and how they were interpreted throughout those centuries.
All right. I want to thank you so much, Al, for being on A Spirited Debate.
You are welcome.
And for more information on this Orlando shooting and other news, go to foxnews.com.
Symptoms without